me of where I'm from. I'm from rural Virginia. And it reminded me of my family and my uncles. And he just talked like somebody I know, you know. And Mr. Hinton spent 30 years on Alabama's death row for a crime that he did not commit. Mr. Hinton wrote an exceptional book that I've already referred to called The Sun Does Shine. And I want everybody to get this book and read it. It is, and it'll change you. It'll change your heart. This book made it to New York's bestseller, right, Mr. Hinton?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
and it
ma'am.
also made it to Oprah's
Book club.
That's right,
Yes.
in 2018. Yes, that is the Oprah.
Yes.
So now you know you want to get it, and you know you want to read it. Mr. Hinton, I'm so honored to speak to you today. I can't even tell you how honored I am.
Oh, thank you so much, and I'm honored to be speaking to you as well. And I hope that whatever I say, that it will find someone and touch them in the sense that to let them know to keep fighting whatever they're going through. We all go through things, and some people seem to go through something more tragic than the next person. But I often say that all of us have a story.
Yeah.
My story is perhaps people say to me all the time, I don't see how you made it.
Yeah.
I couldn't have did that.
Right.
But when you believe and have faith in God, I truly believe that God can get you through anything.
Yes.
All you have to do is have that faith.
Yes, sir.
Guess what?
I reached out to you because I thought that your story could really resonate with others. We are here in Oklahoma, which is one of the highest incarcerated states in the country and even the world, and has a high number of people on death row here as well. But we are advocating for a young man named Julius Jones, who's been on death row for 21 years. And when I look at the details of your story, there's so many things about your story and Julius's story that line up in eerie ways. And so I wanted people, because I don't think that a lot of people still believe that somebody can actually make it all the way to death row, get through appeals, and spend this kind of time in prison for things that they did not do. So what I would love for you to do for our audience is just kind of give us a little bit of your background and then tell us how you got to death row.
One hot morning, I went outside, and I believe this had to be the hottest day that I could recall in Alabama. And I went back inside, and my mother had made some lemonade. And I got a glass of lemonade, and my mother looked at me and she said, are you going to revival tonight? And I said, yes, ma'am. And I got that glass of lemonade, went back outside and sit up on the tree for a while, and I drank it. About 15 minutes later, I went back inside and put my glass in the sink, and my mother was still in the kitchen, and she said, well, what time do revival start tonight? And I said, 7 o'clock, Mama. And she looked at her old clock on the wall, and she said, well, you got time to go out there and cut that grass. And I dropped my head in disgust. I didn't want to cut no grass.
Yeah, too hot.
And yeah, it was too hot, and I just didn't feel like doing it nowhere. But my mother had a rule. As long as you live in my house, you're going to do what I say. There's no exception. Whatever I tell you to do, you do it. And I really didn't have a problem with that. But I said 7 o'clock, Mom, and when she said, well, you got time to go out there and cut that grass, I looked up at my mother and I said, Mama, I promise you, I will cut that grass tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And my mother looked at me and she said, I'm trying my best to see how did you get. You'll cut the grass tomorrow out of me telling you to go cut the grass. Mm-hmm. And she gave me that look that I knew exactly what it meant. And she said, boy, get out there and cut that grass.
That old school look.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. And I want the audience to realize that my father worked in the coal mine, and a rock fell on him and he lost his mind. And so my mother was my father and mother, but I feared my mother more than I did any man. My mother was ruled with iron fists, and whatever she say, that's what she meant. And so as I went out there and to cut the grass, About 25 minutes into cutting the grass, I just happened to look up. And there stood two white gentlemen that I'd never seen before. I cut the lawnmower off and I said, "Can I help you?" And they said, "Yes, we're looking for Anthony Ray Hinton." And I said, "That would be me. How can I help you?" And then they identified themselves as two detectives from the Birmingham Police Department. I said, "Okay, how can I help you?" One of them replied, "We have a warrant for your arrest." I said, "For what?" They said, "We'll explain that to you later, but right now we want you to put your hands behind your back." I complied. I put my hands behind my back. They put the handcuff on me and proceeded to put me in the police car. And I said, "Hold up, at least allow me the opportunity to go in and tell my mother I'm being arrested for something." And one of the detectives said, "We can't let you go back in." And we argued for about maybe 2 minutes. And finally, the other detective said, "Let him go in and tell his mother he's being arrested." I goes in and I just show my mother the handcuff. And like any good mother, she began to scream and holler, "What are those handcuffs doing on my baby?" And the detective said, "Take him out and while I stand here and talk to his mother." A few minutes later, he comes out. We proceeded to go to the Birmingham County Jail. And on our way there, they asked me, did I own a firearm? And I said, "No." I said, "But my mother has an old Smith & Wesson pistol that she keeps around the house for snakes." They dropped me off at a substation, turned around, went back to my mother's house, told her that I told them about her gun. She gave them the gun. They came back, they picked me up and proceeded to go back to the county jail.
But you know what, Mr. Hinton, in the book, you talk about the ride
Yes.
from home to the precinct. Can you tell our audience a little bit about what the detective said to you in that call?
Yeah, well, I kept asking them what I was being charged for, and they never would tell me. And I asked him again, and this seemed to set the detective off that wasn't driving. And he turned around and he said, "We're charging you with first-degree robbery, first-degree kidnapping, first-degree attempted murder." I said, "Well, I haven't done any of that." He looked at me and he said, "Let me tell you something right now. I don't care whether you did it or didn't do it, but you're going to be found guilty." I said, "For a crime I didn't commit?" He said, "You must have a hearing problem. Didn't I just tell you I don't care?" And he turned back around and he looked back at me and he said, "By the way, there's 5 things that are going to convict you. Would you like to know what they are?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Number 1, you're black. Number 2, a white man is going to say you shot him. Whether you shot him or not, believe me, I do not care." He said, "Number 3, you're going to have a white prosecutor. Number 4, you're going to have a white judge. And number 5, you're going to have an all-white jury." He said, "Do you know what that spells?" And he said to me these words: conviction, 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 conviction. And as we got to the county jail, they put me in this holding cell. About 2 hours later, he came back and I said, "Detective, if you don't mind, will you tell me the date and the time this crime took place?" He went in his folder and told me the date and the time. And when he said the date and the time, I said, "Thank you, Jesus." And I said, "Thank you, God." I said, "Thank you, God," because my supervisor was white. I figured once he go out there and talk to my supervisor, they'll come back and say, "We made a mistake. Everything is okay." So I gave him my supervisor's name, the phone number, the address. He left. About 5 hours later, they come back. He opened his cell and he said, "I have good news and bad news." He said, "The good news is we're no longer going to charge you with first-degree robbery, first-degree kidnap, first-degree attempted murder. You was at work. Your alibi checks out. We talked to your supervisor. But we now have decided that we're going to charge you with 2 counts of first-degree capital murder." I said, "Capital murder? But I haven't killed anyone." He said, "On the way here, I told you I didn't care. The same thing apply for these 2 new charges. I don't care whether you did it or didn't do it, but I'm going to make sure you found guilty." As this detective was looking at me, I'm trying to persuade this detective that I could never take a human being's life, and I'm talking to him and Finally, he stopped me. He said, let me be honest with you. He said, I truly believe you didn't do it. He said, but y'all is always taking up for one another. Why don't you take this rap for your homeboy that truly the one that did it? And with tears coming down my face, I said, Detective, there's not a homeboy in this world that I would take a rap for like this.
Right.
And I goes in front of a judge. This judge asked me, did I realize what I was being charged with? And I tell him yes. He asked me, can I afford an attorney? And I tell him no. He looks back in his courtroom. He called his lawyer up to front and tell his lawyer he want him to represent me on 2 counts of first-degree capital murder. Without even asking me my name, the first thing came out of that lawyer's mouth was, I did not go to law school to do pro bono work. I looked at this lawyer and I said, sir, would it make a difference to you if I told you I was innocent? That lawyer looked at me for the first time and he said, the problem with that statement, all of y'all is always doing something. And the moment you get caught, you cry you didn't do it.
All of y'all.
All of y'all, referring to all blacks. And this is a lawyer that I had to believe was going to represent me to the best of his ability. This is a lawyer that I had been brought up to believe that justice was fair. I had been brought up to believe that when you find yourself in trouble, you find a police officer and you tell him he's there to protect and serve, and none of that true. And I sat in jail for 1.5 years and I went to trial.
You sat in jail for 1.5 years before trial.
And when I went to trial, that lawyer did just enough to get me convicted, to make it legal. And that day, that judge stood up and proudly said, Anthony Ray Hinton, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers. It is the order of this court that I sentence you to death. And that judge had the audacity to say, may God have mercy on your soul. And the prosecutor said perhaps a little louder than he intended to say. He said,
take your time. Yes, sir, take your time.
He said, we didn't get the right nigger today. But at least we got a nigga off the street. And I spent 30 years of my life in a 5x7 for a crime that they knew that I didn't commit. I wish I could tell you this morning that race had nothing to do with me going to death row. But race had everything to do with me spending 30 years in a 5x7. It's not about justice. It is about racism, is about men of power do not have to give an account for men of no power. I sit there for 30 years and I began to wonder, would anybody ever come across and look at my case? And I had to truly make myself believe that one day that somebody would come by and look at this case and say, hey, I believe this man is innocent. And After being there for about 15 years, Brian Stevenson took my case. Took him 16 years to finally win my freedom.
Why did it take so long after you got Mr. Stevenson, who we all love and respect so much? He wrote the book Just Mercy. And just for the audience, for audience members who saw the movie Just Mercy, Mr. Hinton's character is played. Who plays your character? O'Shea?
Oh, yes, O'Shea.
O'Shea.
The reason it took so long is that the judges in Alabama didn't have the backbone to do what is right. They didn't have the backbone to stand up for the law. And I used to wonder what it was that made them not follow the law. And it wasn't until I was speaking in NYU, a college student asked me, Mr. Hinton, what's the difference between the judges in Alabama and the judges that sit on the Supreme Court? Did they see something different, or did you file something different? And I said, no, I filed the same motion to every judge. And I realized at that moment the answer. You see, the judges in Alabama have to be elected. And if they rule in favor of a death row inmates, they feel as though they would never be able to be a judge again. And the judges on the United States Supreme Court are appointed for life. They don't have to worry about being reelected. And that's the problem that I have, and that's the problem I truly believe that is going on with Mr. Jones' case, is you have judges can see mistake, but if they was to rule in his favor, they can kiss their career goodbye as far as being a judge. And this is another thing when we fight and holler about reform, we need to fix it where judges would have to rule in a man's favor, and they don't have to let it be known which judge did the ruling in their favor. We got to come up with some kind of way where a judge can vote in secret ballot and say, I ruled in favor of Mr. Hinton, I ruled in favor of Mr. Jones, without anyone knowing who made that ruling. Until we find that kind of law and fix it that way, we're going to have innocent people to continue to go to not just prison, but death row.
Before we go any further, that reminds me that I wanted to ask you, because Julius Jones is through the appeals process. He had a case that we filed with the U.S. Supreme Court, but they did not hear in it, because we know, they only hear like 1% of their cases submitted anyway. Please tell people, help us to understand, how can somebody on death row get through appeal after appeal after appeal and still be innocent and on death row?
The judges that hears the appeal, to be perfectly honest with you, is predominantly white. Right here in Alabama, there's not a person of color on none of the benches. All the judges are white. And they, as I said, they hear your appeal knowing that you have the correct argument, and they rule against you because they can. And you go from this appeal to the next appeal, and they looks at it. In Alabama, they rule every 4 years on your appeal. Mm-hmm. And so you're sitting there thinking that, okay, it's taking a long time, they must be really looking at this appeal. They really already have made up their mind. Mm-hmm. They're going to rule against you. Mm-hmm. And the only way that you will get a ruling from a judge is that they are now considering retiring, and they're not going to seek re-election. Mm-hmm. And they'll rule in your favor because there's no repercussion now from them. They're going to get their retirement check. Boom. And I just think there's no short answer I can give you other than the fact that they have the ability to rule the way they want to, and there's nothing you nor I can do. And the only thing we can do is try to take it to the Supreme Court, who have the authority to overrule whatever the local judges have ruled. And just as my case, it was the United States Supreme Court, all 9 justices ruled in my favor that I was entitled to a new trial. And that's the reason I'm able to sit here today. Had it not been for the United States Supreme Court, Anthony Ray Hinton more than likely would have been gone a long time ago.
Yeah.
Because you don't sit on death row in Alabama for 30 years. The average time to sit on Alabama death row is 15 years.
Okay.
And sometimes the greatest lawyer you can have, and I had, and I mean no disrespect to anybody that's listening, anybody that is lawyer, I had God's best attorney. I had Brian Stevenson. And Brian Stevenson don't parade in court saying that this person is innocent. If you have a history of proving that the person you said was innocent, then you should have your, I'm trying to think, just the fact you say it should mean something to these judges, but it don't. It falls on deaf ear. And so you have to fight. It took him 16 years, 16 long years to win my freedom. And at the end of it,
I'm sorry to cut you off, sir. I just wanted to mention to people, we're talking about Attorney Brian Stevenson, who is a hero when it comes to death penalty work and criminal justice reforms in this country. You can go to eji.org to learn more about his work, eji.org. So I also want to flag for people out there that Mr. Stevenson he was the first person to write a letter of support for Julius Jones. When Julius Jones filed for commutation with the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board in October of 2019, the first letter of support we got was from Mr. Brian Stevenson. And so I just want to honor him in this moment and just say how important his work is and how important his voice has been in speaking up for Julius Jones. Mr. Hinton, what I would like to do is to take our audience back to death row. And I want to know personally, help us understand what death row is like. What is death row like?
Death row is hell. Death row is, have you ever seen a slaughterhouse where they got each calf, hog, whatever they slaughterhouse it is, in their individual cage? And I'm pretty sure most people have seen a slaughterhouse where they have cows and they got like a stick on their ear, and that is the number. Every one of us have a number over our door. My number was 468. That number had a Z behind it, which meant that there was an end to my life behind that number. And at some point in some time, every man on death row goes through this stage of insanity. Mm-hmm. It's noisy 24/7. Grown men just crying out. We have made death row in this country for our veteran who came back mentally disturbed, as you saw in Just Mercy. Mr. Herbert Richardson didn't deserve to be on death row. He deserved to be in a mental institution, but it's cheaper to execute someone than to treat them for mental problems. And so therefore, we have so much in this country that we really need to work on when it comes to this justice system. But death row is a place of pure hell. Every man there will not tell you they're innocent. I found some of the best men that I could ever meet was on death row who made a mistake. And if you listen to their mistake and then they tell you what caused them to do it, it will break your heart. But nevertheless, it is a place of solitary confinement. Most men that went to their death when I was on the road was already mentally gone anyhow. Because can you imagine being in a cell 5x7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for 30 years, 20 years, 25. Mentally, it just takes you and destroys you. And so we talking about a place of horror. We talking about I can't think of a word that more fitting than to say hell.
Okay.
And for everything I read about hell, it's nothing good about hell. And there's nothing good about death row.
How did you keep from losing your mind?
Well, by the grace of God, and I have to give God the credit. God gave me the ability to take my mind and create a world that I could live in. I played baseball every day in my mind. I played basketball. I played Wimbledon 5 times. I won Wimbledon 5 straight years in a row. And to this day, I'm very upset at the fact that no one have sent me my Rolex watch from Wimbledon from winning, and so I played basketball for the pathetic New York Knicks, who I love to death. I won World Series in my mind for the Yankees, hitting the game-winning home run. I created a world of that. So in my book, I talk about how I visit Queen Elizabeth, sit down and had tea with the Queen, and married two of the most beautiful women I think God ever put on earth.
Halle Berry.
Halle Berry, number 1, and Sandra Bullock was number 2. Let me try to explain this to people. In order to survive on death row, you must forget about the world that you once knew. It does you no good to even concentrate, think about your family, your friend, the world that you once knew. On death row is nothing but bad news. The execution of another human being to me was the worst, because I had to smell his flesh burn. I was 30 feet away from the execution chamber. I had to go through all of that. And believe it or not, I might laugh and I may seem to be sound-minded, but I know deep down inside, there's wounds that haven't begun to heal. Mm-hmm. I ask people, how do you live on death row for 30 years? Not seeing a psychiatrist or anyone that you can talk to. How do you expect a person to live? And I often say I have a tape that I put out called What Would You Do? And I want, if I can, I want to give it to the audience and ask them this question. What would you do if you were charged with a crime you didn't commit? What would you do if you didn't have the money to hire a decent defense? What would you do if you passed a polygraph test, but they cared more about the color of your skin than the results of that test? What would you do if you had to spend every moment in a cell the size of your bathroom? What would you do if you was found guilty and sentenced to death? What would you do if you've been waiting all your life to die? And finally, one day, you were set free. Who would you be? You see, I have to wrestle with that every day. Who am I? Because of what I went through. I had to witness 54 men being executed. Every time that there's an execution in Alabama, whether there's an execution in Oklahoma, when I hear about it, my mind goes back to the execution that I had to endure when I was there. And so I laugh and I try to laugh, and I try to be honest with you, I try to defeat the devil at every cost because of what have happened to me. Mentally, it destroys you. Physically, it destroys you. And I want people to try to figure out and understand, when you're there for something you know you didn't do, it is even harder for that person to survive. And I just had to take my mind away from where I was and believe that one day God will set me free. But I have to share this. In the 30 years that I was there, I prayed every day, and not one day did I ask God to free me. I thought if I asked God to free me, that would be the most selfish thing that I could do. But I prayed a prayer of truth. And I asked God in my prayer, if it be his will, I asked him to let the truth come out. And I truly believe that once the truth came out, I would walk out with the truth. And that's what happened for me.
Thank you, God. Mr. Hinton, you were, after Brian Stevenson had your case for 16 years, it was a simple ballistics test. This is what I read, that a simple ballistics test on the weapon could have proven 30 years prior that that was not even the weapon. The weapon in question was a old gun that your mom had had. I think you referred to it earlier. And the cops went to your mama's house, got the gun, and without even doing a ballistics test, convicted you of this crime. If they had done what they were supposed to do in the beginning on that gun, they would have known that it wasn't the gun, and it wasn't you. I want people to read this book. Let me pick it up again. The Sun Does Shine. You already see how special of a human being this is. You need to read every word of what he has to say. I have watched, I'm sorry, go ahead, sir.
They didn't care that the bullets didn't match. All they cared about was cleaning up some crime that had taken place. And that's why I said, if you don't have the money to hire a decent defense, if you don't have the Brian Stevenson that come along and challenge them in every phase. Don't get me wrong, the state of Alabama had every intention of executing me for a crime that they knew from day one that I didn't commit. And when we hired 3 of the world renowned known experts who came to Alabama on 3 separate occasions, it wasn't until then that the Alabama realized they couldn't hide this lie any longer. And they are the ones that notified the judges that they was dropping all charges against me. Mm. And here I am 5 years later. No one in Alabama have had the decency to say, Mr. Hinton, we're sorry. No one in the state of Alabama have tried to make my life whole. No one in the state of Alabama have tried to give me 1 penny to try and start my life over.
Mr. Hinton, you did not get any reparations for 30 years in prison.
No, I haven't even got an apology. But that's what Black men faced in this country. And although I sit and I wonder why we are the target of so much racism. And I wonder what had I done that I deserved to go. But they just didn't take 30 years from me. They took 30 years from my mom.
Yeah.
And when I got released, I had looked forward to the day that I could walk into my mom's home, but God called her home before I got out. And every day I have to live with the fact that I didn't get a chance to say goodbye to my mom. I didn't get the chance to let my mother know that I was free. but I know she knows.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I don't want your audience to be shocked that Mr. Jones is fighting for his life. There's countless and countless of men and women on death row throughout this country. And that's why I am fighting as hard as I can to bring an end to the death penalty, because years down the road, we could find out that Mr. Jones and I was innocent if we executed. What good is that? You can't bring them back.
Right.
And I just believe that we are so an eye for an eye country.
Yeah.
That we don't care about innocent. I don't know the case as well as I would like to know, but I promise you that the governor, the DA, men of power, they hate to say they made a mistake, and they will never say they made a mistake. They want us to believe that they just didn't arrest someone, but they do it every day.
Yeah.
And so we have to keep fighting for one another.
Amen. I know we're going to have to wrap up soon, because you got to go out and be a light for somebody else today as well. But I have seen Just Mercy about 5 times. And it was easier to watch every time, I would see it. But there was one part in the movie that from time number 1 to time number 5 of watching, that in that moment, I every time in the movie, I just lost it. And it was the moment when you walked out of that prison. And I don't know who the ladies were that were there that embraced you, but this little older Black woman embraced you, and she let out a scream, a cry that tears me at my soul every time I hear it, because I recognize it. I recognize it in my own grandmother. I recognize it in the struggle of African-American people historically in this country. I recognize that woman's cry. And I want to know what that moment was really like for you, the day that you walked out. And then I want you to tell our audience, what has life been like for you since? What are some of the big adjustments that you've had to make, and what are you doing with your life now?
Well, that moment, and that was my 3rd oldest sister. And I was blessed to be born, 5 boys and 5 girls. I am the babe of the family. And 3 of my sisters passed while I was on death row, and that left me with those 2 ladies that was there. And just being able to hug them and see them for the first time in 30 years was overwhelming. And I didn't realize until I put my arms around them that I truly was free.
Yeah.
And that outcry was an outcry of hurt and pain.
Yeah.
It's hard to get people to understand that men of color go to prison every day that is innocent. And most family, they go on about their lives like most friends. And just to have them there to welcome me back home was everything that I could ask for.
What are you doing now?
I work for EJI. I am a community educator. I go to colleges, churches, tell my story, talks about reform. I try to educate people about a system that we think is broken, but it's not broken. Mm-hmm. The system is working exactly the way that it was designed to work. I use words because I'm not affiliated with any political party. I'm not affiliated with politics. Most people will have you to believe that we're dealing with mass incarceration. You can call it that, but we're dealing with a new form of slavery. Mm. And the 13th Amendment is the only amendment that still allows slavery. And when you're in prison, you don't have a right to anything. You do whatever you're told. You work wherever they tell you to work. And I want people to wake up and realize that somebody is making a lot of money off prisoners, and somebody is making a lot of money off by keeping the prison full. Mm. And I just think we got so much to do in the Black community. We got to rise up, and we got to write down, and we got to demand these things change. And we can't change just one person. We got to change the whole concept of what it means for justice. And I just truly believe that Mr. Jones, myself, and all these other men that are innocent on death row, it's easy to put men of color on death row in this country. We have sit back and we haven't said anything because it didn't affect us. It didn't affect my home.
Yes.
But I promise people today that what affect you may not affect you today, could affect you tomorrow. You need to get involved. Yes. You need to fight for Mr. Jones. You need to fight for the other men that is on death row. And, we just got our work cut out for us. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life fighting for those that can't fight for themselves, because somebody had to fight for me because I couldn't fight for myself. Yes. I wrote that book, The Sun Does Shine. I wanted to show people what true love felt and feel like from my mother. I wanted people to understand what a friend was, and I had the best friend in the world, Lester, who visited me a total of 9,999 times. Didn't miss not one day in 30 years. He came every Friday. We still are the best friends. I wanted people to get a glance at what forgiveness feels like. And I want people to understand that forgiveness is not about the other person. Forgiveness is about you. And I wanted people to realize that you can only be free when you forgive. I know it might be hard, but those men that plotted and got together and did this to me, they haven't emailed me, text me, faxed me, called me, wrote me, and asked me for my forgiveness. None of them. But I had to forgive them in order for me to live. And I wanted to be free. Yeah. And just as Mandela believed that the only way you can be free is by forgiveness, I believe the same thing. And so they have to answer to their God just like I have to answer to mine. Mm-hmm. And I was not going to allow those men to stop me from being free. Besides writing that book, I've had the privilege of meeting the Queen for real instead of my imagination.
That's beautiful.
I had the privilege of sitting down with Oprah Winfrey, and that same book that she endorsed, she bought the rights to it, and she's going to make a movie out of it. The sun does shine, and if we didn't have this virus, we would have already been made the movie, but we got to wait on this virus to pass. Mm-hmm. But I get joy from going around the country just talking to young people and trying to get them to be involved in a system that is working the way that they set it up to work. And only young people can put a change in it. We got to change the narrative that we have in this country. We got to stop sitting back, being quiet. We got to stand up when you're being told to sit down. I got to get people to speak when you're being told to be quiet. The time is here. We can't wait any longer. And in order for us to make it a future for a younger generation, we got to act now. We can't wait till tomorrow. We got to act today. Yeah. And we got to do the thing in a way that we can get something done. Nothing crazy. Burning and looting don't solve anything. They create problems. We need to concentrate and help these men and women that's locked up, whether they're on death row or just in prison for something they didn't do. And I wish, if I had one wish, I wish we had 500 million Brian Stevenson. Then I can assure you that every man, every woman would have a lawyer that gonna fight with everything, every fiber in their being to free them. And I'm asking any lawyer that is listening, take up a case, fight for that human being, fight for that man, fight for Mr. Jones, fight, fight, fight. And I often tell lawyers, when you fight a good fight, you don't always win. But when you can look yourself in the mirror and say that I gave Mr. Jones all I had, it may not have been enough for him, but fight again for the next person. It might just be enough for that person. And so I'm asking lawyers to pick up the cross and fight when you go in these courtrooms. Don't be afraid to get locked up. Don't be afraid to speak for that people, because he can't speak for himself. And I admire you, and I admire the people that is fighting for him, just as I had people to fight for me. Don't give up. Keep fighting until the end. And believe me, whatever I can do to help fight for him, besides going out now and speaking, I'm on board. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Hinton, I want you to know that Julius knew that I was going to be interviewing you, and he sent you an audio, and I'm going to email that to you because he's so grateful for being willing to tell your story. I also want to say to you that every time, and the audience really, every time you have to tell your story and relive this hell, you give a gift to us, but there's a lot of emotional work and turmoil that goes with the gift that you're giving to us. And so I just want to honor every tear that you have had to shed so that we can be better and so that we can have a better understanding. I really want to honor that kind of emotional work that you put in every day in telling your story, because it's not easy to hear. So I can't imagine how it is to tell. But Mr. Hinton, thank you.
Thank you
for your life. Thank you for your work. For everybody that's out there, did you hear the man say that a movie is going to be made? So just go ahead and read the book, and then we're going to all sit back and wait for Oprah's movie. Okay? Mr. Hinton, God's grace be with you. Thank you so very much, sir.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.